Milo was, by all accounts, a remarkable astronaut, if you discounted his spectacular knack for forgetfulness. While others meticulously checked off their safety gear before boarding a spacecraft, Milo often found himself padding around in sudden panic, humming, "Now what was that thing I was supposed to bring?" This quirk had led to some fascinating near misses in the past. The time he boarded a shuttle without his lunch, leaving him to survive on freeze-dried peas for 2 days, or the time he forgot his sleep mask and spent an entire week looking like a goggle-eyed owl. Yet, despite his pattern of misplacing the essentials, no one could deny Milo's enthusiasm for space exploration and his uncanny ability to innovate when everything was one hair's breadth away from complete disaster. He had never soared beyond Earth's orbit alone until now. The mission, slated to explore a swath of the asteroid belt for new mineral deposits, was supposed to be straightforward. But from the moment Milo approached the rocket that morning, something felt slightly off. He could not locate his usual pair of cosmic lucky socks, the neon orange ones that said, "All ready for life top," across the toes. In their place, he wore mismatched ankle socks featuring cartoonish renditions of smiling potato chips. It wasn't his typical brand of space attire, but he shrugged. Socks are socks, he reasoned, imagining that maybe, just maybe, these silly Spud-themed socks would be even luckier. Little did he suspect that they would be the only lucky break he'd have for a while. The next indication that something was amiss came when Milo rummaged through his pockets for the carefully written flight plan, only to discover that it wasn't there. He patted down his flight suit again, checked behind his ear for reasons he himself couldn't fully articulate, and even turned a disbelieving eye to the outside hull of the rocket, as if documents had a habit of magnetically sticking to metal surfaces. He hurried back to the locker room, rummaged through half the closets, and found the flight plan resting underneath his half-empty thermos of coffee. That was at least recoverable. Crisis averted, he murmured prematurely, it turned out. After all, flight plans are only one small part of a well-managed mission. A lot more goes into a successful journey than a piece of paper with scribbles on it. Soon enough, Milo strapped himself into the spacecraft's pilot's seat. To his credit, he remembered to buckle up. He keyed in the ignition sequence, the rocket roared to life, and ground control gave him the all-clear to launch. The thunderous propulsion hammered his ears. Despite the swirling chaos of fuel igniting beneath him, Milo managed a grin. Off he went, bound for the asteroid belt, a swirling region of cosmic rubble. Each asteroid containing the possibility of advanced metals, water sources, or even unique crystals that might unlock new technologies. All he had to do was land on an asteroid, do some scanning, and safely stow samples. Could anything be simpler? Passing through Earth's atmosphere was the easy part. Milo started to relax as the craft sailed into zero gravity. He double-checked to see if he had remembered his zero-G pin. He had, accidentally stuffed into the same holster as an emergency flashlight. That was progress. Unfastening his seat harness, he propelled himself gently around the cockpit. The control panel blinked helpfully, and his flight plan, retrieved at the last minute, was taped to the console where he couldn't possibly ignore it. Good job, he congratulated himself with a pat on the back. Then, as if to demonstrate that his memory lapses were behind him for the day, he decided to do a thorough personal inventory. Helmet? Check. Support harness? Check. Portable solar charger for his data pad? Checked. Did he have enough oxygen tanks? Plenty. It was looking good. But as the shuttle approached the wide, endless expanse of the asteroid belt, Milo remembered that small detail that had earned him the good-natured nickname Memory Lapse, Milo, at the space agency's headquarters. Where was his tether harness for external walkabouts? It was not in the external storage compartment as he expected. With his brow furrowed, he tore through the cabin, opening and slamming every single drawer, rummaging under the seats, and fiddling with sealed cargo containers. Not only was the tether missing, but so was his backup coil, the one that was supposed to live in a bright yellow case marked with giant stenciled letters. The case was present, but it was empty except for an old candy wrapper and a single roll of duct tape. So, he had a big spool of duct tape, but no official tether. He was barely halfway to the asteroid belt, and already had discovered a glaring oversight. His number one piece of equipment for not drifting away into the infinite blackness of space was nowhere to be found. All was not lost, though. His craft would remain operational regardless, and he had no immediate reason to step outside. So, with the help of some improvised engineering, he reasoned, maybe the duct tape could stand in for a tether if absolutely necessary. What's a space mission without a liberal application of duct tape? He joked aloud, floating around the cabin. He resolved to remain inside as much as possible. He could handle the gig of scanning and analyzing asteroid debris through the mechanical arms built into the craft's hull. If he needed external samples, he'd figure something out. But his daydream of a trouble-free mission got cut short when the flight computer beeped, a malfunction warning for the ship's main sensor array. The instruments needed to be realigned externally, or the readouts would remain wonky and useless, meaning Milo would have to venture out on a spacewalk. So much for staying inside. Spending a moment to grumble softly at the predicament, he then set about rummaging for the next best solution. If he could rig a system out of spare cables, the duct tape, and a few metal hooks, maybe he could anchor himself to the shuttle's exterior. It wasn't NASA approved, but it might keep him from floating away. Soon he was suited up, one foot braced against a seat to keep from drifting, fiddling with the hodgepodge tether made from thick cable lines and layers of duct tape wound around a backup harness latch. A monstrous coil of silver tape shimmered around his midriff, making him resemble a cross between an astronaut and a poorly wrapped burrito. "I look ridiculous," Milo admitted, catching his reflection in the glass. But ridiculous is better than drifting away into oblivion. Satisfied with the invention, if you could call it that, he locked his helmet, stepped into the airlock, and adjusted the improvised tether. Then, as he eased himself out into the vacuum of space, he realized something else was missing. He whispered a low groan into the mic. "Where's my jetpack?" In the standard kit for these missions, the astronaut is supposed to bring a compact maneuvering unit, or jetpack, which provides bursts of propulsion for small adjustments during spacewalks. Of course, that piece of gear had been left behind. For a man known for forgetfulness, forgetting an entire jetpack was firmly on brand, if not exactly career-enhancing. Milo found himself clinging to the edge of the craft's exterior, tethered only by cable and duct tape, with no easy way of moving around. Well, he thought, maybe the tether is all I need. I'll just shuffle along like I'm scaling a cliff. It would be slow, but if it let him fix the sensor array, he deemed it worth the extra effort. Hand over hand, he traversed the rim of the ship. The blackness of space yawned around him, an indifferent vacuum dotted by stars that twinkled like very distant party lights. Ahead lay the dull glinting shapes of dozens of asteroids, each spinning on its own path. The belt itself was mesmerizing, an endless stone carnival swirling around the sun. If the sensor array was fixed, he could get valuable data from these rocky bodies. But it wouldn't matter how beautiful the cosmic scenery was if he drifted uncontrollably. So carefully he inched his way around, metal clamp in one hand, a toolkit in the other, the duct tape tether trailing behind him. He arrived at the sensor array panel, shaped like a rectangular protrusion. Wiping a bead of sweat from his brow, an oddly pointless gesture in his sealed helmet, he carefully unscrewed the panel. The wires looked intact at first glance, but with the help of a flashlight, he spotted a cable that had come loose. For a second, his heart soared. That's no big deal. However, there was also a bit of heat damage on a secondary circuit that might require a patch. Great, more patch jobs. Managing to wedge a small circuit board from the repair kit in place, he connected the wires, gave them a little twist, then pressed the reset button. The sensor array blinked to life. Perfect. Except now he needed to do another short cable fix a bit further along the ship's hull. Even he, champion of forgetfulness, couldn't forget that detail. The hazard lights on the hull were blinking an urgent red, politely letting him know there was more trouble waiting. He started his snail-like journey to the next location, and that's when his improvised tether gave a worrying shudder. He stopped, mid-latch, to check it. The duct tape was holding, but barely. He pressed it back into place and added a fresh strip from the pocket on his knee, but it refused to cling permanently to the metal or the thin cable beneath. Laughing nervously into his mic, Milo said, "I do not like the looks of that." He tried to keep it light, feigning confidence in front of Mission Control, but Mission Control wasn't live with him. They wouldn't check in for another hour or so, a logistical decision to allow him some breathing room. At least that gave him the freedom to curse if the duct tape truly failed. Bravely, Milo pressed on. He was nearly to the second cable junction when a small meteorite fragment, no bigger than a golf ball, zipped by with a soft whoosh. Then another came whistling from the opposite direction. Indeed, he drifted right into a shallow swarm of micro-asteroids, tiny, but not entirely harmless. Alarm blossomed in his chest. If one of these lumps decided to greet him directly, it would be like a bullet strike. And if it hit his tether? No use picturing that dreadful scenario. He had no jetpack, no second tether. He would be a cosmic balloon drifting away with no one to reel him in. As if on cue, a small piece of rock flicked the tether with a hollow tap, and the duct tape severed in one clean swoop like a scissor cut. For a millisecond, Milo didn't move. He was pinned to the hull by only one gloved hand, trembling as he stared at the severed tape flapping in the vacuum. From somewhere in the corners of his terrified mind, a comedic voice quipped, "This is only slightly less than ideal." The next microasteroid missed him by mere inches, spinning off into darkness. The risk of letting go was huge. One slip and he'd float away. His heart pounding, Milo decided that the only feasible plan was to channel what he had seen in old rescue videos. If he could push off from the hole just enough to launch himself to the airlock door, and if he timed it perfectly, he might jam his hand inside the opening mechanism or one of the handles near it. He performed a mental countdown. On 3, he'd leap. For someone famously forgetful, he was fully immersed in the present moment now. Counting the seconds out loud, he steadied himself. 1, 2. He slapped his free hand on the hull for traction, then mustered the mightiest outward push he could. He soared in a graceful arc, albeit in slow motion, due to zero gravity, directly toward the airlock door. Fear twisted his stomach into knots, and if he'd been breathing heavily in normal gravity, he might have fainted. As the thick door loomed closer, he reached out a gloved hand, feeling his body sail forward. At first, he thought his angle was off because the door handle was veering a little to the left. He twisted in midair, desperately grappling, and by sheer luck, or was it the spud socks, his fingertips snagged the handle. The ship's exterior felt alarmingly smooth, but he was able to hook 2 fingers around a groove in the panel. "Yes!" he exclaimed, sending out a whoop, but before euphoria could fully set in, his battered tether line, swinging behind him, managed to tangle around one of the sensor rods. He found himself suspended awkwardly, half letting down. Still, he could open the airlock from this position. "Take that, universe," he muttered, pressing the open button. When he finally tumbled into the narrow airlock chamber, every muscle in Milo's body felt like jelly. His tether line was utterly shredded at this point, useful only as a cautionary tale for future missions. With trembling hands, he secured the interior latch and cycled the chamber, letting air fill the space. As soon as the pressure stabilized, he triggered his helmet release and gulped in a breath. There was that distinct metallic tang that always seemed to linger in spaceships, but to him it was the sweetest aroma in the galaxy. He had survived. He had made a fix to the sensor array, and most importantly, he had not become a silent, orbiting memorial in the middle of the asteroid belt. "I will never look at duct tape the same way again," he sighed. Swiveling around in the cockpit, Milo ran swift diagnostics. The sensor array was in decent shape now, spitting out data about the surrounding asteroid field. The second cable junction fix would have to wait. There was no way he was attempting that spacewalk again without a proper tether or the jetpack that he'd so brilliantly left behind. Still, data from the first repair was encouraging. The readouts showed a cluster of asteroids enriched with rare elements. It'd be wise to collect at least a few samples if possible. According to the onboard equipment, a mechanical scoop on the underside of the craft might suffice for smaller asteroid chunks. Milo decided to attempt a sample retrieval using the remote arms. That way, he'd stay safely inside. He carefully piloted the ship deeper among the spinning rocks, minding the swirl of debris. With the console's joystick, he extended the mechanical scoop, rotating it around until it pointed at a mid-sized chunk of metallic rock. The tricky part was timing. The rock drifted unpredictable patterns as if showing off a cosmic dance routine. At last, an opportunity came. The rock slow twirled just beneath the scoop. With a grin of satisfaction, Milo pressed the clamp button, and the metallic jaws closed around the asteroid chunk. "Gotcha!" he declared. Yet as fate would have it, the capture triggered an unexpected chain reaction. The asteroid must have been part of a looser cluster because as soon as the clamp latched onto it, a few smaller rocks slammed into the hull. One particularly sharp fragment bounced and punctured a small thruster valve. Immediately, alarms flared inside the cabin, red lights pulsing, and the autopilot spat out a notification. Thruster malfunction detected, manual override recommended. Because of course, Milo mumbled, pushing a few buttons to seal off that thruster. The ship lurched as the auto stabilizers compensated. On the bright side, the captured sample was still safe in the clamp's iron grip. Milo was forced to rely on the remaining thrusters to maneuver away from that unruly cluster. The controls, usually smooth, started to feel jerky. It was like the entire spaceship had decided to pick up a hobby in interpretive dance. Through clenched teeth, Milo cornered the ship between two large asteroids and found a relatively calm area to park. He took a moment to breathe. So far, the day had thrown a sensor array meltdown, a near-catastrophic tether failure, a micro-asteroid swarm, a severed duct tape lifeline, and a busted thruster. And it wasn't even lunchtime by Earth standard. Glancing down at his watch, the one thing he never forgot, he realized he'd better check in with Mission Control soon. They'd want a progress report, and he dreaded telling them about the fiasco. But he realized it would be far worse not to. So, with his best attempt at a self-assured voice, he began, "Mission Control, this is Milo. Do you copy?" He half expected them to come online with an anxious flurry of questions, but the line crackled for a moment before a friendly but slightly muffled voice responded. "We read you, Milo. How's it going up there?" Taking a second to organize his thoughts, he decided to stick to the facts, albeit in an abbreviated way. The sensor array is partially fixed. The thruster took a wound, but the ship is stable for now. I also discovered that my tether was missing and the jetpack. A pregnant pause filled the audio channel, heavy with disbelief. Then, Mission Control responded with remarkable calm. "Missing? How did you handle spacewalks?" Milo cleared his throat. "Let's just say, duct tape can do almost anything." There was a collective sigh on the other end, followed by some rapid chatter. "Well, if the thruster's damaged, you may need to attempt a quick fix," came the eventual response. "But let's do it carefully this time, okay?" At that point, Milo's stomach rumbled. He rummaged for one of the meal pouches, eventually retrieving creamed spinach surprise. With no better alternative, he wolfed it down, ignoring the oddly watery texture. After a quick break, he buckled down to see if the thruster fix might be done from inside. He recognized that if the damage required external soldering or patchwork, he'd have to wait for a rescue team or a replacement tether from a future supply pod. But maybe, if the tear was small enough, an internal patch could reroute the fuel lines. The diagrams showed promise. He pried open a small maintenance hatch behind the cockpit, diving into a compact labyrinth of tubes and cables. Working by flashlight, he identified the thruster feed line that had likely been severed. Sure enough, a small trickle of fluid was seeping out. "I can fix that with a clamp and sealant," he told himself. Reaching back into the cramped space, he contorted his body like a circus acrobat, cursing whatever engineer decided the thruster line needed to be so far in. After about 20 minutes of grunting and tight-lipped determination, he managed to secure a clamp around the compromised section and apply a sealant patch. "There," he whispered, wiping sweat from his forehead. "All better, I hope." Back in the cockpit, Milo ran a pressure test. The thruster systems showed minimal leakage, well within safe parameters. Encouraged, he powered up the engine in a controlled manner, feeling the ship's gentle vibrations. No catastrophic alarm sounded. Inch by inch, he tested the craft's maneuverability. The newly patched thruster hissed, but functioned decently enough. "We might actually survive this," he joked. Leaning into the microphone, he updated Mission Control. They hailed him as a resourceful hero. He tried to ignore the traces of irony in the compliment. Now, with the thruster partially repaired, the next step was to exit the belt safely. He still needed a few more asteroid scans, but nothing that mandated another spacewalk. Extra caution felt paramount. With gentle adjustments, he directed the ship around the swirling rocks. Some slid past menacingly close, but he managed to keep a safe distance. Soon, the scanning equipment indicated it had collected enough data for a preliminary study. Mineral compositions, cosmic radiation readings, even a whiff of what might be an icy deposit. With that, Milo's job was essentially done. The final task was to pilot the craft back to Earth, deliver the info, and next time, hopefully remember everything from the official NASA checklist, not just a roll of duct tape and questionable socks. He charted a course home. The ship rattled as it accelerated away from the asteroid belt's gravitational influences. Once free, the wide emptiness of space opened up again, and Earth, now just a distant blue marble, beckoned him forward. Milo allowed himself a moment to exhale the tension in his shoulders. He might be a forgetful soul, but in a weird twist, his improvisations rarely failed. He recalled a conversation he once had with a veteran astronaut who told him, "Milo, someday your forgetfulness might be matched by your resourcefulness, and that's when you'll really shine." Today might not have been a shining moment of perfection, but at least he'd proven resourcefulness could save his hide. Next time, though, he'd triple-check the cargo manifest. As he neared Earth's orbit, Mission Control gave him clearance and a warm welcome. "We're just happy to have you back," they beamed. Milo chuckled, feeling simultaneously grateful and embarrassed. In the final approach, the battered craft jostled, re-entry flames licking at its heat shield. By the time the parachutes deployed and the craft touched down on the designated landing pad, Milo's pulse was hammering, more from relief than from fear. The hatch cracked open, letting in fresh Earth air with a rush. Stiff-limbed, he climbed out, giving a thumbs up to the recovery crew. The base team erupted in cheers, some hoisting a sign that read, "Welcome back, Milo." Another teased, "We got an extra supply of duct tape for you, buddy." He just ran a hand through his messy hair, stepping onto the solid ground with a grateful sigh. As the post-mission debrief began, the flight directors peppered him with questions. "Explain again how you ended up in the middle of the asteroid belt without your tether or jetpack?" one asked. Milo coughed awkwardly. "Well, I suppose I was too busy looking for my lucky socks." That got a few chuckles. Another official piped up, "But you're safe, and you managed to salvage the mission. We see you brought back some interesting samples." "Yes, sir," Milo answered, the tension easing from his voice. "I think we'll get some good data out of them." The director nodded, scribbling notes. "We appreciate your resourcefulness, but next time," Milo offered a tight half smile. I know. Check the gear thoroughly. No important items left behind." Days later, once the dust settled and Milo traded his grungy flight suit for more comfortable clothes, the story of his hair-raising improvised tether and thruster patch circulated around the Space Center, inspiring both groans and admiration in equal measure. Some insisted he had cosmic angels looking after him. Others said his fiasco highlighted the need for stricter checklists. Milo retained his sense of humor, sporting a new t-shirt that read, "Duct tape, astronaut's best friend." But every time he closed his eyes to rest, he still felt that momentary panic of the tether snapping in space. While he could laugh about it, he also knew he was lucky beyond measure to be back on Earth safe and sound. When the next mission briefing came up, because of course, his successes and near disasters made him a valuable if slightly exasperating asset, he arrived bright and early. The briefing officer didn't hesitate to rib him. "Glad to see you on time, Milo. Did you remember to bring a pen?" "3 of them, actually," he quipped. "And a backup tether, a secondary jetpack, a backup for the backup tether, and a large suitcase of duct tape, just in case." A round of laughter filled the room, and Milo took his seat, prepared to soak in every detail of the new mission. Whatever fresh cosmic adventures lay ahead, he was determined to spend more time on the pre-launch checklist. But if, heaven forbid, he once again forgot something essential, well, at least he knew how to make do with duct tape, a prayer, and maybe some Spud-themed socks.